Okay, so this is lesson 3-4, graphing linear equations in standard form. Okay, it's on the board if you need to know how to spell all that. Graphing linear equations in standard form, 3-4. Okay, so the first thing I want you to write is this first sentence where it says the standard form of a linear equation is ax plus by equals c. And then you might make a note under it or just write the sentence where it says where a, b, and c are real numbers and a and b are not both 0. So all that means is this is just a generalized a, b, and c would be numbers. X and y would still be there, okay? So you're not going to draw these, but you're going to kind of look at just horizontal and vertical lines. If it crosses the y-axis, but it's horizontal, that is a y equals equation. Y equals a number. If it is a vertical line, or it crosses through the x-axis, it's x equals a number. If that doesn't make sense, that's okay. We're going to talk about it in an example. Let me see if it'll let me scroll this time. It worked. Okay. So example 1. It says horizontal and vertical lines. Let me erase those. Okay, so it says graph y equals 4 and x equals -2. That's the whole equation right there, y equals 4. There is no x, so what that tells me is I'm going to go up to 4 on the y-axis, and it's going to be a line that directly intersects that. What I mean is that just means no matter what your x value is, y equals 4. So if we say, okay, let's look at x is -2, y is 4. There's a point. If we looked at +2 for x, y is still 4. That's a point. 3 on x, y is still 4. No matter what, y still has to be 4. So it is a straight line through 4. That is y equals 4. Anytime you don't have an x or you don't have a y, it's going to be exactly horizontal or exactly vertical. Okay? Anytime we have other numbers or both x and y, that's when we get our diagonals. Okay, so that is the graph of A. On B, x equals -2. So now we have no y, we have x is -2. So we will go to -2 on x, and our line will intersect that. It'll go straight through it. Then whatever value you plug in for y, so say we want to know for y is 4, x has to be -2. So when y is 3, x is -2. When y is 2, x is still -2. So -2, 1, -2, -1, -2, -2. So our line is straight up and down. Okay, so real quick, let's try a couple of these and then we'll move on. So I want you to pause the video and graph the linear equations 1 and 2. Okay, on 1 and 2, we are graphing. So 1 is y equals -2.5. So that means no matter what value you put in for x, y is going to equal -2.5. So if x is 0, y is still -2.5. If x was 4, y is still going to be -2.5. If x is -2, y is still -2.5. So no matter what, y is -2.5. So it is a horizontal line. So think of it like, since it's a y equals, it's going to be equal with your x-axis because it's going to cross the y-axis at -2.5. So then our next one, number 2, x equals 5. Well, that means you just go to 5 on the x, and it's going to be there because no matter what value we plug in for y, x is going to equal 5. So if y was 2, x is 5. If y was -4, x is still 5, no matter what. So it is a vertical line at 5. So basically, whatever it equals, you go to that number on that axis, and it's a straight line through it. So x equals 5, a straight line through x at 5 on the x-axis. On y equals -2.5, you go to -2.5 on the y-axis, and you have a line going through it. Let's look at example 2. So now we're going to look at 2 terms that I want you to write down, your x-intercept and your y-intercept. You've seen these before. Okay, I know you have. It's just been a while. So you can write this sentence down if you want, or your x-intercept is the point where it crosses the x-axis. which it says that. The y-intercept is the point where it crosses the y-axis, and we're talking about your graph. Okay, so x-intercept will always be set up. Sorry, I'm having to spell with my right hand. Okay, is always the point where you have some number a, but your y is always 0 on your x-intercept. Okay, well then your y-intercept, I always put just x-int, y-int. Your y-intercept will always have 0 for the x. And then these would be some number. Okay, it depends on the problem, on where it crosses the axis. So now we'll look at how to use that x and y intercept on example 2. So it says using intercepts to graph a linear equation. So we're still talking about linear equations, which means they make a straight line, but we can use that x and y intercept to graph it. Even though I know you maybe know how to rearrange it and graph it, we're going to look at that later. This just means use your intercepts. So here's our equation. 3x plus 4y equals 12. So we're going to find our x and y intercepts. Well, we already know the x-intercept is the point where y is 0. And our y-intercept is the point where x is 0. So to figure out the rest of those points, you just go back and plug 0 in. So to solve for the x-intercept, I'm going to plug 0 in for y and solve for x. So that's what they do here. So if I plug 0 in for y, that becomes 4 times 0, which is just 0. So I'm left with 3x equals 12. So to solve for x, we would divide both sides by 3. Those cancel and you're left with x equals 4. So you would come back, your x-intercept is the point 4, 0. So now let's find our y-intercept. So to solve for the y-intercept, you're going to plug 0 in for x and solve for y. So we're back to the original equation. And I plug 0 in for x, and I'm going to solve for y. Well, 3 times 0 is 0, and I'm left with positive 4y equals 12. So I divide both sides by 4. And we get that y equals 3. So I come back up here, it's the point 0, 3. I now can take these 2 points and graph them on a coordinate grid. So you don't have to draw a fancy one, just draw it like this, and then draw some little dashes for lines. Okay, so the x-intercept is the point 4, 0. So I go over 4, 0, put a point. That should make sense. The x-intercept is where it crosses the x-axis. The y-intercept is where it crosses the y-axis. So there should be points on those lines. So 0, 3. Once you get those 2 points graphed, you just draw your line through them. And we now have graphed 3x plus 4y equals 12. Okay, so you are going to try these 2 problems at the bottom. Using your x and y-intercept, graph these 2 equations. It says label the points corresponding to the intercepts. That just means they want you to go back on your graph and in parentheses put this is the point 0, 3, this is the point 4, 0. Okay, so pause the video, try those, and I will go over them. On 3 and 4, we are graphing, but it says use your x and y intercept to graph. So first let's find our x and y intercepts. So your x-intercept is the point where y is 0. Your y-intercept is the point where x is 0. So you just plug those in. So I'm going to plug 0 in for y to solve for my x-intercept. So I have 2x minus 0 equals 4. Well, that just cancels. You have 2x equals 4. We divide both sides by 2, and I get that x is 2. So my x-intercept is the point 2, 0. My y-intercept is when I go back and plug 0 in for x so that I can solve for y. Well, 2 times 0 cancels, but I have a negative y equals 4. That's a negative 1y, so I have to divide both sides by negative 1. Y is negative 4. So now you draw you a little graph. We're going to graph these 2 points. They should be points on an axis. So the point 2, 0, the x-intercept is where it crosses the x-axis. So that means I go over to 2, 2, 0. Then the y-intercept is the point where it will cross the y-axis. So I go to 0 on x, go down 4. From those 2 points, I can draw my line. We have now graphed that one using our x and y intercepts. Okay, so now looking at number 4, I have x plus 3y equals negative 9. Okay, so I'm going to plug 0 in for y so that I can solve for my x-intercept. 3 times 0 is 0, and we're done. X equals negative 9. Now I'm going to plug 0 in for x so that I can solve for y. That just drops. Divide both sides by 3, and we get y is negative 3. So, on my x-intercept, I'm going to have to draw some more points. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, still not enough, 8, 9. So I have negative 9, 0, and my y-intercept is 0, negative 3. So our line is a lot more horizontal than up and down, but it is still not a straight line, okay? Sorry, I'll scoot back over so you can see that a little better. So it looks kind of like that. So now we're going to look at example 3. So it says you are planning an awards banquet for your school. You need to rent tables to seat 180 people. Tables come in 2 different sizes. Small tables seat 6 people, and large tables seat 10 people. So the equation you could set up is 6x, okay, let me finish reading it. 6x plus 10y equals 180 models this situation, and they say where x is the number of small tables and y is the number of large tables. So they set that up for us because small tables is x. Well, each small table holds 6 people. And then y is large tables. Each large table holds 10 people. So that's where they got these numbers, and we're trying to seat 180 people. So they gave us 6x plus 10y equals 180. So this one has 2 parts. It says graph your equation, interpret the intercepts. That's like what we just did on the previous example. Then it says find 4 possible solutions in the context of the problem. Okay, I'll explain that a little more when we get to it, because right now I know that sounds confusing. But A, let's just graph it and interpret our intercepts. So first, you're going to have to find your x and y intercept. So your x-intercept is the point where y is 0. Your y-intercept is the point where x is 0. So to solve for x, we're going to plug 0 in for y. Yeah, I guess I kind of don't do that here, but it's okay. So if I plug 0 in for y, that cancels. I'm left with 6x equals 180. And then we would divide both sides by 6 to get 30. So I'll just come up here and write it. So my x-intercept is the point 30, 0. So then to find my y-intercept, I'm going to go back to the original one and plug 0 in for x and solve for y. So I have that 10y equals 180. Yeah, that 8 looks terrible. Sorry. Okay, divide both sides by 10, and we get 18. So our y-intercept is the point 0, 18. So we could graph that. So they just did like an L-shaped instead of continuing the graph this way, because you can't rent like a negative amount of chairs or tables because we don't have a negative amount of people. So it's only going to be in the top part of the graph, that first quadrant that's always positive. So if you notice, they actually counted by 2s. They did that to be able to fit their numbers on here. Okay, so you can count by a pattern if you're doing it like this, if your numbers come out large. So my x-intercept is 30, 0, so I go over to 30 on the x-axis, and there's my x-intercept. My y-intercept is the point 0, 18, so I go up to 18, and there's my point. We draw a line through them. There's our graph. Interpret the intercepts. Okay, so what that means, if we go back and look, my x-intercept is the point 30, 0. Okay, these are actual coordinates, points. Every point is always x, then y. So what that means in this problem, they told me x is the number of small tables, y is the number of large tables. Okay, so what it means by interpret that, let me see if I can move this. It shows right here, the x-intercept shows you that you can rent 30 small tables when you do not rent any large tables. So you could just word it to say, x-intercept 30 small tables when you rent 0 large tables. Okay, your y-intercept is you could rent 18 large tables when you rent 0 small tables. That's all it means, is can you go back and talk about this in terms of the problem? Okay, then B says find 4 possible solutions in the context of the problem. So we would go back and look at our graph. Let me switch colors here. Too far. Okay. So we go back and look at the graph. And let's see if we can tell 4 more places where it touches the line. 4 possible combinations. We'll see. Blah, blah, blah. Okay, yeah. So let's just do 2 more because we already have the 0 ones. So if I look, here's a point. There's a point. That's the only other 2 I see. So good thing we only needed 2 because we have this one and this one. What I mean by a point is where it actually crosses on an exact spot. So here we have the point 10, 12. And then over here, we have the point 20 and 6. So you would just then talk about those in terms of the problem like we just did. So 0 small tables when there's 18 large. They could rent 10 small tables and 12 large at one time, 20 small and 6 large, or 30 and 0. So what I want you to do is try number 5 right here at the bottom. If you notice, it says graph the equation and interpret the intercepts. You don't have to go back and tell me other numbers from your graph. So you're just graphing that equation and then interpret your intercepts in terms of the problem. So pause the video and then I'll go over it with you. Number 5 said you decide to rent tables from a different company. So we're talking about a different company from the example we just did together. The situation can be modeled by the equation 4x plus 6y equals 180. This is our equation. And it tells me where x is the number of small tables, y is the number of large tables. We're going to graph the equation and interpret the intercepts. So the first thing let's do is let's go ahead and find our intercepts, our x-intercept and y-intercept, so we can graph it. So our x-intercept is where y is 0. Y-intercept is the point where x is 0. So I'm going to plug 0 in for y and solve for x. Anything times 0 is just 0, so I have 4x equals 180. So I'm going to divide both sides by 4. See, 4 goes into 18 4 times. That is 16. It goes into 25 times. So 180 divided by 4 is 45. So I have 45, 0. Now I'm going to plug in, I'll do it over here, 0 for x so that I can solve for my y-intercept. So that cancels. So I'm dividing both sides by 6. Let's see, 6 goes into 18, 3, so 30. So here's our 2 intercepts. Okay, so we haven't even answered the question yet. It said graph it. Since this is all positive, rather than drawing the 4-way, I'm just going to draw this because we're not going to have a negative amount of chairs or tables. So it's all positive. Since we go to 45 and 30, I'm going to count by 5s. If you count it by 10s, that's okay. Just you're going to have a pattern, so I'm not going to have to draw 45 lines. Let's see. And I'm getting close to running out of room. But it's going to work. Okay. Barely. Okay. So my x-intercept, my first point is 45, 0. My y-intercept is the point 0, 30. We draw our graph. Your graph should look like that. Okay, that was the first thing we had to do was graph it. Then it said interpret your intercepts. So you actually had to go back and tell me what it meant in terms of this problem. So my x-intercept was 45, the point 45, 0. So every point is x then y, okay? X then y. They told me in the original problem, x represented the small tables. Y was the large tables. So what this means, my x-intercept, is that they can have 45 small tables when there are no large tables, when there are 0 large tables. It just wants to know, can you go back and put it in terms of that problem? So the y-intercept would be 30 large tables when there are 0 small tables. Now we have interpreted our intercepts.